afternoon, everyone. Jamie said that I didn't need any introduction, so there will be no introduction of me, which is probably just as well. My purpose today is to have a great discussion with Roxanne Austin. Roxanne is the president and CEO of Austin Investment Advisors, and in her spare time, she serves on some really amazing boards. She serves on the boards of Abbott Laboratories, AbbVie, CrowdStrike, Freshworks, and Verizon, and previously was on the boards of Target and Teledyne. So she's seen quite a lot of the scenario from the boardroom. She was named the 2018 Director of the Year by the Corporate Leadership and Service organization in the Forum for Corporate Directors, and is considered one of the most influential directors in boardrooms by the National Association of Corporate Directors. She started out at the D&T early on. She moved up through the financial ranks, CFO, and then eventually CEO, and then she got to where she is today. So please join me with a warm welcome for Roxanne Austin.
Thanks, Ron.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the boardroom. And let me just start out. You're a director on some pretty serious boards, both mature companies, large cap, and some smaller companies. You've seen some companies coming along. Many of the people in this room are in that situation today. What's front of mind for you and your colleagues in the boardroom?
Well, it's everything that John talked about earlier, certainly, you know, with inflation and geopolitical issues with Russia, Ukraine, and what's going on with the Fed and what's going on with supply chain. It's all those things, but it's also thinking about how we create the right work environment going forward for our employees. I think, you know, many companies are struggling. CrowdStrike is not. They had a virtual environment, as George said earlier, from almost day one. But many, many people are struggling with what is the right work environment going forward? How do we retain our talent? Talent's a big issue right now because even, you know, as John said about, we have many people who've never seen inflation. We've got many, many people who've never seen a stock market downturn like we have, seeing their options underwater the way they are, perhaps not. But that's, you know, we have a group of employees that have never seen this type of a situation. And so how do we bolster them and mentor them through this process and retain them and don't lose them through this entire time frame? So there's a lot of time on talent right now, quite frankly. Talent,
yeah. So the Montgomery Summit, which is one of my favorite annual get-togethers, brings together a wonderful set of companies earlier in their life cycle, many Series B, C, some D. As these companies successfully grow, how do you think about the skill sets required for their boards, and how do you think about evolving those skill sets?
Well, as you guys all know, you start out with a lot of investors on your board.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it starts out. But I think then you need to transition in that early stage into people who can help scale the company. You know, people who have been there, done that, perhaps CEOs who have scaled from your level to you know, a larger company, whatever your goal is for your company. People who have been through the IPO process but have scaled. I think the other issue that a lot of tech companies have is, quite frankly, there's a lot of focus on product, but they don't focus as much on the go-to-market engine and how that's going to work. So I think bringing some people on that have really strong go-to-market skills, whether that's a president and COO or it could be a, you know, it could be a even a CRO of a really, you know, company that's really scaled to a large level, like a, you know, a Zscaler or a whatever. You could pick someone like that. I mean, I think it's really a time frame where really thinking about what's going to be the important driver for this company's success. Product is always first. But beyond product, it's not just about the product. It's how am I going to scale this business and what's the most important factors? And do we have the right go-to-market engine? Do we have the right advice on the go-to-market? I think that's a big piece that I see, at least right now, that I'm seeing in a lot of companies.
So that's the progression you need to have. And the question then, as a director of whatever flavor you happen to be for that board, how do you know if you have the right experience? How do you know when it's time to rotate somebody off the board? How do you deal with the issue that you're missing a skill set, that you have some directors who think it's their job to manage the CEO day to day, others who feel it's their job to just check to see the money's coming in? What are sort of the things you've learned in your experience in these companies?
Well, I think there's, first of all, I think there's different stages. As we said, there's that early stage where it's just investors. Then you've got the stage where you're bringing on people that can help you grow and help you think through that scaling process. And then, you know, and maybe in that time frame, you're bringing on people, like I said, that maybe are, you know, helping with go-to-market, et cetera. Then I think you're going to the if you're pre-IPO, you've got to bring on some people who have experience in public markets, who can help you through that process. Clearly, you're going to have to get an audit committee chair, for example, that can help you through going through the IPO process. Having people with public market experience is important. So you've got all these different stages. I think one of the hardest things for young companies is the board, quite frankly, in building the right kind of board. Obviously, your investors have a lot of input to that, as you know, in these early stage companies. But I think, really thinking through a quality, I'm going to use George as an example, because I think George really did an excellent job. And I'll give you...
You're talking George Kurtz.
George Kurtz, I'm sorry. George Kurtz, who spoke earlier today. George Kurtz at CrowdStrike, I get a lot of calls, as you do, Ron, from young entrepreneurs who want to talk about going on their board. And the week that I got a call about CrowdStrike, I'd talked to 3 different entrepreneurs that week. And the person that called me said, hey, you got to talk to this guy, George Kurtz. He's amazing. He's building this great company, CrowdStrike. He's amazing. You're going to hit it off with him. He's your kind of guy. He's very focused, blah, blah. So I said, well, I've had 3 meetings already this week, and they were all over in the first 10 minutes. Now, why were they over in the first 10 minutes? Because, at least mentally, I was over in the first 10 minutes. I'm not sure the meeting was over. Why did that occur? It occurred because all these people wanted to talk about was IPO, IPO, IPO. That's a financing, okay? That's a financing like any other financing. I don't want to talk about the IPO. I want to talk about what kind of company you're building. So the person that called me about George said, he wants to come down and have lunch with you. I'm thinking, well, damn, that's going to be a long lunch if, it's over in the first 10 minutes. So George flew down, and we had lunch, and it lasted an hour and a half. And why did it last an hour and a half? I guess it was almost 2 hours, actually. It was because George wanted to talk about building a great company, about how he was going to build a company, and how important having the right people around him to help him think through and grow in areas where he didn't have experience. He didn't have experience in public markets. He didn't have experience in some of the other areas that he was looking for board members for. So George was really thoughtful in why he wanted the type of board members that he wanted, and the fact that he was prepared not to go public when we went public if we weren't ready. That's another key thing for me, for young entrepreneurs. You don't go public just to be going public. You do not go public before you're ready. And George said, if I need to wait a year or 2 years or longer beyond when we're thinking we're going to go public, I'm okay with that. I've spent the last 7 or 8 years building this business. I don't need to go public, to validate what I'm doing. I want to go public when I'm ready to go public. And if you tell me, Roxanne, we're not ready, then I want you to tell me that, and we won't. Might not have made Jamie happy, but anyway. But George we was building a great company, and I think that's everything you do in building your company. Your board should be just as important in building your board. Build a great board that can give you the type of advice. Listen to the advice. They're there to advise you. They're not there to tell you. They're just there to advise you. And hopefully you're listening to that advice, and you grow from that opportunity to listen to the people that have actually been through multiple cycles, as John and I have, and you and I have, Ron. We've been through a lot of downturns. And I can tell you right now, the most important time for you to to have a great board is when the crap hits the fan. I've been there when the crap hits the fan. And I've worked out of those situations with the management teams. And I can tell you right now, the board is critically important in those times because they help you get through the tough times and see the other side and get to the other side by helping and advising and helping you get through it. Because a lot of people that haven't seen it, they panic. That's understandable. But for those of us that have been through many, many crises, we can help with that. So I would say, really be thoughtful in how you develop, nurture the relationships with, and cultivate your board. It's one of the most important things. They're not the, show up kind of board of the old days, as John talked about earlier. The boards now are very active and important, I think, in the job.
Yeah. So you gave the example of George, who's a remarkable standout. But if you think about most entrepreneurs, you think about product focus, and you think about what a founder needs to be and who they are, and often their age and experience or lack thereof, as the company has some success, the question then becomes one of growing and scaling with the company. How do you turn the tables on selecting board members as the company grows? How do you as a director think about, how do you know you have the right CEO at that point in time for what's coming next? How do you deal with the issue when you may have some issues of founder stock, control stock, you have egos involved, you don't want to break anybody's heart, you can't live with this guy, but you can't live without him. How do you deal with situations like that? When do you know it's time to make a change?
Yeah, I've dealt with this issue.
By the way, this is the least fun part of being a director.
You know, I think if we're going to use the positive, use George as a positive. George has scaled at or above the scaling of the company. So I think George has grown tremendously. So he's an example of a person who can scale and grow. There are others where you see the stress, whether it's the stress of dealing with the public markets. You know, one young entrepreneur that I'm working with right now, he's struggling with the whole aspect of being in the public markets, and you know, it's tough. You know, those first 2 or 3 earnings calls were ugly, pretty ugly, and you're getting beat up in the after calls. You know, it ain't fun. And he said to me, as I talked to him really at length about before he went public, if they were really, really ready, and whether he was ready. And he said to me, you know, you spent 2 hours with me on this just topic about whether I was ready and whether I really understood what being a public market CEO was really all about. And he said, I recounted that to a group of young entrepreneurs the other day. And I said to them, you know, I have this board, you know, this person that I've been working with, and, you know, she's really said to me, you know, this is going to be tough, and do you really understand it? And now I know what she was talking about. It's like when I was venture-backed and you know, just had investors on my board, and everything was going, it was like being in college, and I was partying and having a great time. And then I went public. I was married with 2 kids. My wife had her thumb on my head, and I said, you said that, I didn't. But, you know, I think there is a real reality that people need to understand. It's not always fun to go public. That's why I don't want to, when people say IPO, 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 I say bye, 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 because you're just looking at an event and this fantasy of what being public is all about. It's a financing. So let's really talk about the reality. It's a tough world out there to do that. So anyway.
Yeah, well, we went through that in spades with Uber, as we went from being a very, very fast-growing company that discovered it was different to be a public company, went through an IPO. The whole question was IPO readiness, and also the skill sets of folks inside the company, and also, frankly, some of the folks on the board who were, as you said, some of the earlier stage investors. So you sit on some pretty awesome large cap company boards. Mm-hmm. And you know, as we all do on these boards, as you sit around the table, your fiduciary duties as a director, your duties of loyalty, your duties of care, duties of confidentiality, all those sorts of things, whether it's a Delaware company or other incorporation. How do you balance the pure financial interest of those directors who continue on the board, who are early investors and have meaningful stakes, maybe not controlling stakes, but 5, 10, 15, 30, 40% stakes, and the duty that you and they have to represent all the shareholders, not just their venture firm or their PE firm?
Well, that's why you have independence on the board, right? And, you know, and I think you have to, we've had situations where we've called people out, right? I mean, where people have said, you can tell that they're pushing their own vested interest. And we've had to say, you know, look, guys, you know, we got to do what's right for the shareholders here. We got to do right for the company and what's right for the shareholders at all. So all the shareholders, and that's a tough one, Ron, because, you know, as you know, it doesn't happen. I think most people that I've worked with, at least, have been really, really good about having the right perspective and trying to be objective and doing the right thing. But there have been those situations where, you know, we have had to say, I think that you need to recuse yourself, perhaps even, because the issue is so significant to them personally.
That's why it's good to have a critical mass of more experienced directors 100%. On the company when you've gone public, so that the individuals who say, hey, those rules don't apply to me, they realize they're outliers. So how do you know when it's time to bring a company public? You talked a little bit about reasons not to bring it public, but how do you know when it's actually time And how do you know how to do it? IPO, direct listing, SPAC, or whatever glittery thing is out there at the moment when you decide to make that decision.
Yes.
Anybody here remember SPACs?
They kind of lost their luster, didn't they?
I'm dating myself.
I think this is industry dependent. I think it's company dependent, right? I think there's certain industries, you know, obviously our valuation models now have changed, right? We're all looking at things differently. You know, how fast can we get to a positive, you know, cash flow, blah, blah, blah. But I think, you know, right now, I think it's uncertain what the right answer is for when you're ready to IPO, right? We're in a different market. It's going to be delayed. I don't think people are going to go public the way we did 2 years ago or even 3 years ago or even a year ago. I think we're in a different market. I'm glad some of the companies that went public raised the money that they did in the last 2 years because I think it's going to be a tough market here moving forward. So I think we're in a different world right now. I think we've all got to be realistic about valuation. We've got to be realistic about when we're ready and really think about, you know, growth and ultimately profitable growth. I think there has to be a path to positive cash flow. You don't have to be, don't have to be positive cash flow. I'm not saying that, but I think there needs to be a path that you can articulate now because people aren't just investing in growth anymore, right? They're really concerned about, will this company ever be profitable? How is it going to, is there a path there? And understanding that path. So I really think right now, I think kind of all bets are off. I think we need to look at the industry, the market, you know, what's happening in the individual companies, because it's a different ballgame. We've been through this before, as John said. We've all,
yeah,
you know,
it goes through cycles. Well, the last few years, some of the smaller companies that I've been involved with, everybody can't wait to go public. And as an old public company CEO, I keep telling them, be careful what you ask for. Because there's days when you say, this is absolutely nutty being in the public fishbowl. I remember back in 2007 at Northrop, when I was running Northrop, we were so discouraged with the market capitalization on our industry in general, which was aerospace as well as the company. We were approached by, I think I said it was a Carlyle group. We talked, we could take a $25, $30 billion company private. It would have been probably the first or second largest take private deal. And it got quite a lot of interest. I got my board involved. And we started to make progress. And then suddenly the financial crisis hit. And of course, all bets were off. And it didn't happen. But I've always wondered what it might be like to run a private company instead of a public one. So thinking about directors now as the company continues to proceed, there are many raters and rankers out there. There's ISS, there's Glass Lewis, there's CalPERS, there's CalSTRS, all the folks out there that invest money and have a decision of how you run things. And they all seem to have superior knowledge about what director tenure and age should look like on a board. When I was a younger director, I always thought we should get rid of them when they turn 50 or 60 or something like that. I've discovered that's not as smart an idea as I used to think it was. How do you think about what is a good way to think about director tenure on a board or age limits, and does one shoe fit all?
I don't think one shoe fits all, honestly. I think you should have term limits, personally.
Term limits.
Term limits on. Now, I'm gonna say this differently. So if you're in large cap boards like you and I are on, like a Verizon or an AbbVie, mm-hmm. You know, those types of companies having a term limit of 15 years, whatever that number is fine. I think we're moving more toward a 10-year or less kind of time frame ultimately, which I think makes tons of sense. I think in these earlier stage companies, it's much shorter, yeah. Right? I think it's 3, 5. I don't know what the right number is. No. 6. I mean, but it's not 10. I don't think in most of these companies. It's probably shorter when you can actually add value in these spurts of time. Yep. Most people want you to be on their board when they're ready to go public for at least 4 years. I think that makes a ton of sense, 4 to 5 years. But should you be on there 10 years? I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think we need to really, I think it's company dependent. I think at the end of the day, we have to look at where you can add value and where the directors can add value.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. I would say that as the company, if the company is in a long cycle business with long capital deployment, for example, a Chevron, right, which makes huge multi-billion-dollar capital allocations, which might have a 10, 15, 20-year cycle, or a drug company.
Like AbbVie.
Like right. AbbVie or Amgen or something like that. It's good to have just a few directors on the board whose tenure exceeds a typical product cycle.
That's correct.
And so there's kind of probably a mix there. And that kind of gets to the next question, I think, that might be interesting here is, people sometimes say a board is a lot like a salad bowl, which means not everybody should be the same. And it should be a diverse set of individuals with skills and experiences which are mutually additive. And of course, the overlay to that, of course, represents ethnicity, gender, and all the other national origin, which also makes a board diversity. What in your mind, Roxanne, makes a high-performing director? What does a high-performing director look like, and by extension, a high-performing board? You sat around the table from a lot of folks. You've seen good ones, and you've seen some maybe not so good ones, right? What are some watch-outs?
Well, you don't want a cheerleader. But I don't like cheerleaders. People are like, yay, great job, you did great. That's fine when you do a great job. But we need people that can actually say, have you thought about, have you considered? Everything is not great all the time. So, cheerleaders is a watch out. I don't think you want a cheerleader. You don't need people that need to talk all the time. I think some of the best directors are the ones that sit back, listen, and speak when they have something really important to say and to add to the conversation. I learned a lot on a board that I was on in Sweden. I was on the board of Ericsson in Sweden. And my very first board meeting, I show up. I'm obviously prepared, but we sat around the boardroom, and this particular board had 4 union members on it, which I'd never experienced before. It's quite a different environment. But the chairman of the board, who's a non-executive chair, because you cannot have a chairman CEO combined in Sweden, non-executive chair. So we go around, we're talking about this really thorny issue, and he turns to me to start the conversation and says, what do you think and why? So in American boards, we had not, people don't put you on the spot like that typically. I do that now as a lead director, by the way. You don't want me as a lead director, because I do it all the time now, because I think it's great. But he put, my very first board meeting, he puts me on the spot. This is a super thorny issue. It's very, it involves all kinds of issues with the union and with this and with that. And so I had to take a position. And had I not been super prepared, had I not been, really thinking about this issue before we got there, it would have been challenging. But I learned from that I think being super prepared, people read what you send them. So if you're sending them, people are going to read it, so let's have a dialogue. I love a board that talks. I don't like a board that has lots of PowerPoints, shows up with 400, and they take you through every slide. Send the directors the information in advance, give them an executive summary if you'd like from your perspective, but then show up and be prepared to engage the board. That's what they're there for. They're not there for you to present to them or just to have one-way communication. They're there to really have a dialogue with you, a thoughtful, have you considered, maybe have you thought about, here's scenario, you've got your scenario B, but where's C and D? Because, we don't need just I can tell you right now, having only a B backup is not great. You need to also consider all the scenarios that could occur. So we have lots of dialogue around what is the C plan or the B plan or the D plan. So, I think that's important.
Yeah. So ESG, maybe you guys have heard about that too. Until the invasion of Ukraine and the market setback and a few other things, at least my experience was as a director going to see every investor and dozens of them in my company roles, it was all ESG all the time. And the question, I think, as a director, how do you look at ESG? Is this a serious thing that has to have capital allocation against it? Is it something you have to do as a hedge strategy to allow you to have a social license to operate? How do you tell the difference between making serious ESG investments for your company, even if they're not economic near term, and virtue signaling? And how does that kind of come into your board thoughts and your board discussions?
Well, first and foremost, I think having a social conscience and how you treat your employees and how you treat your community and that should just be part of your DNA of your company. If you're doing all the right things, if you're a Verizon or an AbbVie, they don't have to overlay some ESG plan. That's part of who you are. That's how you build your company. And I always recommend to young entrepreneurs, you should build your company from day one about having a set of values that are important to you and to your company. And if you do that, the flavor of the month of whatever we're going to call it, it was, we've had different names for it,
right.
D&I, then it's ESG, then it's whatever.
Right.
But at the end of the day, having a diverse workforce, treating your employees correctly, and being engaged in your community and doing the right thing, considering the environment, all that stuff. If you build a company with the right set of values, you don't have to have a program or a process. It's part of who you are.
Yeah.
And that's what I think makes the best thing. And I talk to a lot of the corporate governance groups from various big shareholders. I talked to 45 last year, different shareholders, BlackRock, blah, blah, blah. They have these governance groups that are separate from, as you know, the guys who buy. So anyway, so the governance groups have a very specific objective around ESG, and I was there to talk about comp, and all they wanted to talk about was ESG. The good news was it was easy to talk about ESG because I was talking on behalf of Abbott, or I was talking on behalf of AbbVie, and these companies just have a great DNA. So I think I would just advise you guys starting younger companies just to have a great DNA from day one, and guess what? That serves you well throughout the years. It makes things easier.
Yeah. So maybe one final lightning question here in the couple of minutes we have left. How outspoken, as a board member, do you think your CEO and frankly your board should be around all the social and political issues we see today? Think about any lessons from George Floyd, any lessons from Don't Say Gay, Russia, Ukraine, school shootings, and my God, there was another one today I just read, abortion, Roe versus Wade. How are you dealing with that in the cross-section of your boardrooms, and what's the advice you're giving your CEO?
Well, I think the first thing is, first of all, does it affect your business? If it affects your business, you should take a stand. If it's in your business specifically and it affects it, then that's an area where you would take a stand. I think you do the right thing by your employees. So if you believe that women have the right to choose, then you pay for your employees to travel. If they're in a state like Texas where they perhaps may not be able to get an abortion, pay for them to travel to another state. There's ways to have the right social conscience without coming out with a public stance one way or the other. One thing that I learned in one company that I was on the board of, that we took a stand on. We actually had a memo that leaked, internal memo around transgender bathrooms, and it leaked, and we basically had almost an uproar in the South where we lost hundreds of millions of dollars in sales over a quarter.
Wow.
Because we had taken a position on transgender bathrooms, and it just turned into a big mess. And I think that the reality is we still have, the company still has the same policy today. Use the bathroom of your choice, of your gender. But they had to put in family bathrooms in every location because of this issue. So I just think you have to tread lightly. You have to think about the potential consequences where we have a country that is so divided. We have 50% of the country that thinks, or maybe whatever percentages you want to put to it, but we have a certain percentage of the country who have a certain political view. We have another half that have a different view. You have to be sensitive that you may have a group of customers that are in all those buckets. And so as a company, you have to think about the consequences. It doesn't mean you don't take a position, but you have to think about the consequences of that position. And certainly, I would focus on what it means to your business and what it means to your employees, and there's the places where you need to consider what to do. So.
That's a great way of looking at it. Well, we're just about out of time, and I think the board you serve on are very fortunate to have you.
Well, thank you.
And my only regret tonight is that I never got to serve with you on a board, but it would have been fun. It would have been enjoyable to do that. I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussion. I hope you have too. Let's hear it for Roxanne.
Thank you.